Hello, I'm Brian Walsh. I'll be introducing you to the basics of web programming. Now, when most people hear the word programming, they run and hide, but I can assure you that that's not the case with this course. We're doing web programming. Web programming in general can be broken into three types. The first type is called markup, and that's what we'll be dealing with. That's code that's already written. Essentially, all you're doing is reusing it. As a bonus, it's written in what could be called a shorthand English. So you already largely understand it just by looking at it. So examples of that would include HTML and CSS. The second type of programming would be scripting languages. So a scripting language is one with its own syntax and structure within which you can create your own functions. So an example would be JavaScript. That's obviously a little bit more complicated than markup. The third level of programming is called programming language, like C or Java, which really requires a computer science degree to work with. This is the type of programming presented in films like The Nerd Breaking into the Safe and Die Hard. We won't be learning that sort of thing. What we will be learning is the basics of HTML and CSS. So if you'd like to get a preview of what that code looks like, pause this video and right-click or control-click on a blank area of your browser that you've got open right now. And a contextual menu should pop up. Choose the option to view source, and what you're looking at is HTML mostly. You can do that trick on any web page. So to write code like that, we need some sort of application. You can actually write code in nearly anything, like Notepad or WordPad or even Microsoft Word, any text editor. But using a dedicated web coding program is greatly advantageous. I recommend you download and install a program called Brackets made by Adobe. From this point on, you'll be looking at my computer screen and hearing my voice instead of seeing my face. I apologize in advance if there are any significant differences in the audio quality or the legibility of my voice. I'll be working on a desktop Mac, but you can use a PC or a laptop or whatever you want if you wish. It just might look a little different. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so here is my currently empty desktop. The first thing I want everyone to do is get some coding software. So if you want to follow along with me, I'm going to go to my web browser here, and I'm going to go to the following address, brackets.io. Now, we could use just about any program application to code for the web, but this is going to make it a lot easier. Brackets, I'm going to go ahead and download this. Brackets is a open source coding program. It's actually built using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which is kind of cool. You can even download it and see the source code if you want. Well, mine's downloading. My application is downloading right now. When it's finished, I should see something like this, which is telling me to drag Brackets into my applications folder and then launch it. Now obviously that looks very different on a PC. If you are working on a PC though, hopefully you know how to install a new application. If you're on a Mac, once you've followed the steps I laid out, you should have Brackets in here, and I'll go ahead and launch it. Alright. So once you launch Brackets, you'll see it opens up two code files. These files are doing a couple of things. For one thing, they're describing what Brackets is and how it works. In fact, if you were to view these files in a web browser, they would look like a normal web page. In this case, it looks a little bit abnormal, and that's because we can see all of the HTML, the code that makes up this page. The HTML is, in this case, the stuff that is orange. I think that's orange. And it's surrounded by these little triangle-shaped brackets, and occasionally has a slash in the front of them. So that's what HTML looks like. Remember, HTML is a markup language, which means it's already been written. So it's very easy to recognize. You can't make up your own HTML. By the way, this other file, here are our files listed on the left-hand side, is a CSS file. This is what CSS looks like. This is what we'll look at in the second part of this class. We're going to start, of course, with the HTML. Now, it's nice to look through an existing HTML document and get a sense of what it looks like, the syntax and structure of the language. But to really learn it, we need to create our own new document and start typing the code ourselves. So to do that, we could just create a new document. I can go File and New, but this is a completely blank document.
What would make our life a lot easier is if we had the basic codes needed to create a blank page in HTML, and we use that as our start point. So that's what I want to do. And in order to facilitate that, we want to use Brackets Extension Manager. Brackets is a very basic coding program, but through extensions you can make it very, very powerful. So I'm going to File and Extension Manager, again on a PC that might be in a different location, but it should bring up a very similar pop-up here. I'm going to do a search here in the search box for HTML skeleton. Oops, I accidentally closed that window. HTML skeleton. Don't hit enter after typing that in, apparently. Here it is, HTML skeleton. HTML skeleton allows you to add various HTML elements straight into your document, freeing you from typing it yourself. Well, that's exactly what we want to do. So I would click the install button here, but I have already installed this extension into Brackets. In your case, you will have to hit install, and then I believe you will have to relaunch Brackets in order to see the changes take effect. So I'm going to go ahead and quit Brackets, and then go to recent items and launch Brackets again. Again, if I click that install button and it installed an extension, installing an extension usually requires a restart of the program, not of the computer, but of the program. Now things will look exactly the same. What we need to do is File and New, so we have a blank document here. And now we can use our extension. I'm going to go to the Edit menu, and all the way at the bottom you should see Insert HTML Elements. So here's that plugin we downloaded. What we want to do is this very last option, and that's the only box we want to click, Full HTML Skeleton, and hit Done. When you do that, you'll see this code. Now, if you ran into any problems when you were trying to get to this point, first of all, that's completely understandable. We've never done anything like this before. Heck, we just met, right? But what I would encourage you to do if you ran into any problems either downloading Brackets or installing this extension is to rewind this movie and listen to my instructions again and give it another shot. If you ever feel like I'm going too fast, feel free to hit pause. That will make things a lot easier for everybody. Okay, so now that we have our basic document showing up here, the next thing we're going to want to do is save this file. Once we've saved this file, it'll have a location on our hard drive. It'll make things a lot easier for us. You never want to work on an HTML document unless it's already been saved. You know what the name of the file is and you know where it's located. That's really not going to seem important this early on when our main intent is to learn the code, but file management is what we're talking about, and it's the area that people new to web design run into the most problems. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this currently called Untitled 1 file, and I'm going to save it. So let me do File and Save As. And I'm going to click this arrow, this down arrow, because I don't want to save it in Getting Started. I don't really know where that is. I'm going to go to the desktop and make a new folder. And I'll call it Intro HTML. You can call yours whatever you want, as long as you can remember it. Now again, I just made the folder called Intro HTML. Now I have to name this HTML document. Well, take it from me, the best thing to name an HTML document is index. Index.html. All lowercase. The reason for that, by the way, is if you direct a web browser to a address such as Amazon.com, Apple.com, something like that, what it's going to do is automatically look for index.html. So if I go to Apple.com, ta-da, there's Apple. If I add /index.html up here in the address bar, it's loading the same page, and it's a different slider here, but it's the same thing. Here, I'll refresh. So this index.html is assumed. So if you name your files that, you can just give someone a very basic URL, and it will load index.html automatically. I guess you could say that this is the best name for a home page. Well, getting back to our task at hand, we're going to name this file index.html and save it in the new folder that we made. In my case, I put it on the desktop. You may want to save it on the desktop, you may want to save it on an external drive. It does not matter. What does matter is that you put everything in a folder that you are making right now. Trust me, this will become more important. And that you name your file index.html. Once we've done all that, now we can start learning the code. In fact, you may have noticed a difference. Right after saving the file, you can see that my code has changed its colors. It's color-coded now. All of our HTML tags, that's what they're called, such as body, head, title, those are all in that orange color. Then we've got some green and yellow. Well, I can tell you right now, this green and yellow, that's a parameter of, in this case, the link tag. And it looks like that's all the colors we have. Well, we have this white color as well. Well, one other thing I'm going to do to get set up here, and I promise we'll be done setting up, is I'm going to make my brackets application window larger, and I'm going to increase the size of my font. I'm going to do that by holding down Command and hitting plus, which is a shortcut. Now, you don't have to do this, but I'm trying to make my code as large as possible so it is as easy as possible for you to read. There's also a tendency for people to make their coding just really, really small fonts and make their eyes struggle. I see no point in that. So my font is going to be about this big. I hope that's okay with you. You can leave yours where it is. And now let's get into the code. Okay, so now that our coding environment is set up and we have saved our file, let me show you why we did that. Here's my folder. It's called intro HTML, and inside it is an index.html, the file name that we gave it when we saved it. Now mine has this little Firefox icon, but don't worry about that. That just means it's a web page, basically, and that if we double click it, it will open in my default web browser. Here's my default web browser, and you can see that this is completely blank, right? Well, let me show you a couple of things while we're here. First of all, I'm going to hold down the Control key and click anywhere on the screen here, and there's an option to view the page source. Just about any browser can do this. By the way, if you're on a PC, you can just right-click instead of control clicking. But if I view the page source, you'll see there's the HTML. In fact, that's the exact same HTML we have over here. Again, you can do that to any page. So where we were before on apple.com, if I wanted to see the code for their index.html, I could try this control click. Now, if I click it on a image, it thinks I'm trying to do something with the image. So let me try down here. There we go, view page source. So there's the HTML for apple.com. Obviously, this is much more complicated than anything we have looked at so far. We're not going to get our coding up to the point where we can do all of this crazy stuff, but you'd be surprised how well you will understand the contents of a page like this or its code just by learning the basics. So, going back to the index.html, I've got it open in a browser. Again, it's totally blank. Let's see if we can just create some really basic content and get it to show up here. So I'm going to go back over to my code here. We're going to go over what these things mean, but before we do, let me just get you to do something really quickly. You should see on lines 9 and 11, or around there, an opening body tag and a closing body tag. Well, the body of your HTML page is where all of the visible content is. That is all the stuff that you would see in a browser. So if we want to add content and be able to see it over here, we would want to write our code in between the opening and closing body tags. So that's what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to hit return a few times just to create some space. So you know that doesn't matter when you're writing code. You could hit return 100 times. It's not going to change anything about your code. It might make your life a little bit more inconvenient. So I'll just hit it that many times. Okay. So here's what I'm going to write. I'm going to start by writing an HTML tag. This is called a heading tag. So it's a caret followed by h1, and then I'm going to close it. Now you can see brackets has automatically closed my h1 tag right here. That's a feature that you can turn on or off. I'm going to leave it on. Anything I type between the h1 and closing h1 tag, again that slash means closing, will be the largest default text that I can just throw onto an HTML page without styling it with CSS. So let me just try typing hello world, and I'll put an exclamation point in there. I'm going to go ahead and hit save, file, save. There we go. And now if I switch back over to our browser, if I hit the refresh button, there's hello world. And again, we can control click, view the page source, and see there is our code right there. So what happened? Well, HTML is basically a set of instructions to the browser. And what we just did is instructed the browser to insert a headline or heading text of size 1 into here. So you know there are some other headings. There's H2. We can write hello world in there. We can create, well, guess what the next one is? H3. Everybody who codes like to copy and paste because there's a lot of repetition. So what I'm going to do is highlight this line. I don't see anything there. Let me highlight it all and do edit, copy, and then go right below it and say edit, paste, and there's the same line twice. I'm going to change this one to an H3 tag. So let me hit save and then go back over here. Now you don't see any of that stuff, right? I have to hit refresh again. There we go. There's 3 different sizes of hello world. Just to finish this up, if you're wondering, there are 3 more sizes. It goes up to H6. So I'm going to change that for you. Oops. Don't quite know my shortcuts in this program, and that's okay. You can do this with me if you want, or not, as long as you understand it. So there's H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6. Those are all headings or headlines. Again, pre-written style for these in HTML. You can tell that they are bold and that they have a particular font size to them. And we're not going to worry about what that font size is because once we learn CSS, we'll be able to change it anytime we want. So we've got some content showing up. That's pretty good. I think now would be the best time to do a quick overview of what this other stuff on the page means. So at the very top we have something that says doctype HTML, and it has an exclamation point at the front. Well, this is just indicating to a browser that would read this set of instructions that the following instructions are written in HTML. The next line is HTML lang equals, and then it's got opening and closing quotes and nothing in it. Well, what we want to plug in there is the language or the short code for the language that we are coding this page in. Now that is, the content of this page will be written in English. Hello world is our only example thus far. But that's the language being referred to here. That is, we are all using the markup language HTML to create HTML documents. The content of that page has a language of its own, though. So we're doing English. The shortcut for that is, well, we can just do EN. So the line now says HTML lang equals N. And if you can't figure it out, I'm going to throw you a bone here. Language equals English is what that means. All right, let's move on. Now we got this head section. Remember we were talking about the body section before? Well, you can break the main sections of an HTML document into 2. There's the head, and then there's the body. It may not surprise you to learn that the head is located above the body, just like on a person. Well, also similar to a human being, the contents of the head are largely invisible. We do not see them. They are not always visual, whereas everything we put into the body of our page will show up in our browser. That's why we plugged all our heading tags with hello world inside the opening and closing body tags. We do not want to put that type of content in the head. So what type of content ends up in the head? Well, this is a meta tag that's indicating the type of character set we are using. This is basically saying the type of keyboard we're using. You know how if you were going to Japan, the keyboard would be different. Even if you went to Britain, the keyboard would be different. They'd have a little euro sign where the dollar sign is, things like that. So those are different character sets that keyboards use. We are using UTF-8. That'll make it so the stranger punctuation characters that we use get translated correctly. So if you were to view our page in Britain, it should show up just fine. This section defines the title of our page, so I'm going to just type something in between the opening and closing title tags. So I'll call it Intro to HTML. Now again, if I save this document and then switch over to my browser, you can see up here in, well, this is called the title bar. All it says is the name of the file, index.html. Well, now if I hit refresh, it says Intro to HTML, and that's where we plugged in the title. Again, going to Apple. I don't I don't work for Apple. They're not paying me for all of this promotional stuff, but you can see that they plugged in their own text, right? They also have a little icon. That's called a favicon. We don't have a favicon yet. We're not going to be able to get to that in this course, but it's very easy to add, so you know. You can always Google it if you want to find out. Moving on in our boilerplate code here, we then have a link to an external style sheet. And the actual location of that file would be defined here in the href, and you can see it's blank. There's nothing in between the opening and closing quotation marks. Now that's what we're going to learn how to do in the second section of this course. So we're just going to leave that blank for right now because we're not going to get the CSS. And then here's where the head closes. So again, a forward-leaning slash or a slash going from left to right indicates that that is the closing of a tag that was already opened. Most tags work that way. The title tag opens, and you can see it closes. Other tags don't. They don't need to be closed. The way I've always tried to remember it is some tags don't really need to open and close. They're simply a declaration of fact. So this meta character set is a good example. There's no need for that to close. We are just declaring once and for all for the entirety of this document that this is the character set it will use. As opposed to, say, the title, which does have to end, right? If we didn't have this tag right here, then all of the contents of our page, starting from this opening title tag, would be the title of our page. That'd be kind of a long title, so we don't want to do that. So it's very important to close your tags. And as you've seen, brackets will try to do that automatically for you, which is fine. We also have an opening and closing linked to an external script. That's not going to do anything. We're not going to use that. But it's not going to cause any harm if it's just sitting there on our document. Going all the way down to finish things off, again, here's our opening body tag, all the heading tags that we created, and then you can see body closes. And then we close the HTML tag. Now you might be thinking, wait, did we have an opening HTML tag? Well, we did. If we scroll back to the top, it's on line 2 right here, HTML. The only funky thing is it has a parameter right here, lang equals n. So HTML consists of tags that are pre-written and parameters that are also largely pre-written and modify the tag. But when you close an HTML tag, you only close the tag itself, like this. You do not close the parameters. Other things that we can mention about the syntax and structure of HTML would be that any parameter that you create uses the same syntax, which is equals and then double quotes, right? Lang equals n, character set equals UTF-8, rel equals style sheet, just to give you some ideas. Now I know that this code is still pretty confusing. We don't know what all of these little instructions mean. We will, as we move on, try to think about this all a little bit more big picture. We are just learning the syntax and structure of this language right now. We will not be able to harness its power for a little bit longer. Okay, so now that we've got our document set up, I'm actually going to shrink brackets a little bit so I can see my code on one side and the result next to it. So we've done these heading tags. I'm going to go just below those and hit enter and create a P tag. This is for a paragraph. So this is a paragraph. Let's see what that looks like. I'm going to save and refresh. This is a paragraph. Seems to work just fine, right? What if we wanted to separate these two with a line? Well, there is an HTML tag called HR, which stands for horizontal rule. If we save that and refresh, it'll put that little line in right there. Now you may have noticed that I didn't close HR. That's because, like I mentioned earlier, HR is something that happens once. It is not something that requires a beginning and an end. It is just an instance, as opposed to the paragraph tag, which does require a closing P tag. If we took this paragraph tag, or rather the entire paragraph with its opening and closing tag and its content, and duplicated it, pasted it underneath, so we have two of the same things, one after another. If I refresh, you'll see that it does a full carriage return and includes a space a line space between these. That is the default behavior of the paragraph tag. Okay, some other basic tags that we can go over really quickly. How about an ordered list? Well, guess what the tag for that is? OL. That does require a closing tag, so we have an opening and closing ordered list tag. So this would be to create a list of numbered items, number 1, number 2, number 3. The list should automatically populate with the numbers if we just create list items. So you'll see I created some space in between these opening and closing tags because I'm going to plug in LI, or list item. So let's see. What should we put in order? Well, how about baseball teams? We'll do the AL East. How about that? So I'm going to pretend that the Boston Red Sox are at the top of the division, which they are not. And after them, I'll plug in the New York Yankees, LI. How about the Toronto Blue Jays? All right, that's enough stuff. So I will hit save, switch over here, and let's see what it does. All right, look at that. We did not type these numbers or periods. They were added automatically. So if we had accidentally plugged in 1 period space Boston Red Sox, we'd have 2 of them there. That's not what we want. So let me not write that in. That is automated by the code. You can also see that it does a text indentation. Yeah, that works pretty well. Let's create a different kind of list. I'm going to go after this closing ordered list tag and create a new one, UL. That's for an unordered list. So let's just do the things we need from the grocery store. How about some milk? Eggs. I'm going to stick to dairy here. And cheese. Sounds good. So I'll hit save, refresh, and you can see that an unordered list also indents and then it has bullet points. Now at this point you might start recognizing the fact that our page is really unattractive. That is because we have not dealt with any of the style commands that we will do when we start learning CSS. That's what CSS does, is make our page look good. All HTML does is insert our content. What a lot of people say these days is that web design is modular. And what they're talking about is you do all of your content with HTML, and then you switch over to CSS. Remember, this is what CSS looks like, to change the appearance of things. So you can see you can adjust margins, internal margins, set the widths of things, change fonts, font sizes, line heights, text colors, background colors, you name it. CSS is pretty fun. It's certainly more fun than HTML, which, since it's just a structural language providing content, isn't all that exciting. But at the same time, there is something to be said about the excitement of being able to write code and just have it show up in a browser. So that's the good thing about HTML, to say the least. Okay, so now that we've got those basic commands down, let's try doing something a little bit more complicated. I want to try to add an image to this page. Now to do that, we need an image file. So I'm going to switch over to our browser, open up a new tab, and I'm going to do a search for HTML head body. By the way, you can use any image that you want. Doesn't matter to me. I'm going to do the images tab. Okay, here we go. That's the image I was looking for. So this tattoo might now make sense to you. Let me scoot it out of the way. I'm going to grab this image and drop it into our folder. Now this is what's really important, is that we take the file and we put it into the same folder as our index.html file. Let me close this stuff and take a look here. So it's called html-head-body. Well, that works. I could keep it that way, but I like to rename files when I download them. So I'm going to hit enter and just rename this tattoo. If I can spell it. Okay, is that how you spell tattoo? Let's find out. Yes. All right. Obviously, I don't have too many tattoos. So there's tattoo.jpg. Everything lowercase. That's what I like. I like that. Okay. So now we've got the image and it's in the same location as our file. We can switch to our code and do the following. img, or image, source, or src, equals, this is a parameter, tattoo.jpg. And let me close that. So let's take a look at this line we just wrote. img is the tag for image. Image is an HTML tag that requires a parameter. The required parameter is the source of the image, which is just what the name of it is in this case since it's in the same location. The image tag is also an instance. It does not need to be a closed tag. It is a self-closing tag. Let me save and then refresh and we should see that image. There it is. Okay, so that was relatively easy since the image was in the same place as our HTML file. What if it was a little bit more complicated? What if I made, and you don't have to do this with me if you want to just watch, but what if I made an images folder and the tattoo image was in there? Well, I can show you one thing. First of all, if we refresh, there goes our image, right? It's not working anymore. You've probably seen an icon like this on the web before. That's not a good thing. The reason it's not showing up is because we are indicating in the code, here is the file. It's in the same location as this file that we're editing, index.html. Well, as we can see, that's no longer the case. So we would have to add to the path this images folder. So the new image source would be images/tattoo.jpg. And if I refresh now, it'll show up again. So this will give you a little bit of a hint of how the names of your files and more importantly the locations of your files are incredibly important. If this file was somewhere completely different, like let's say it was just on my desktop, well, how in the world am I going to code for that? Well, first of all, I should say this is bad practice. Anything you're going to put on a web page, you want it all to be in the same folder. Everything, images, scripts, you name it. Get it all in here. It's just going to make your life a million times easier and avoid problems like this. But to answer the question, how do I get this file, index.html, to show this image, tattoo.jpg? Technically, it has to go up a level in its directory hierarchy. So the way we would do that is with a ... In other words, take where you are, go up a level, and then find the file called tattoo. And then if we refresh here, let's see if that worked. Yep, it's still there. Now I'm going to take my tattoo file, move it back into the what I would call correct place, get rid of this images folder, and change my code back to what it was originally. And if I refresh, everything should be the same. So that was a little crash course in not just adding images, but the importance of file locations and file naming conventions. I personally like to keep all of my files, names and extensions in all lowercase. A few other good ideas. I'll type this out in a paragraph tag. Actually, maybe we should do this as an unordered list. That would make sense. No spaces in your file names. What else? No punctuation. If I can spell punctuation, eventually I can. Let's see, anything else? I'm going to avoid capital letters. Now there is an exception to that, and that would be what I would call camel case. So, going back to this example, if we had 6 images of tattoos, I probably want to name them tattoo 1, tattoo 2, tattoo 3. Well, if I just write in tattoo 1, that's not that easy to read, right? Tattoon, it looks more like. A better idea would be to use what's called camel case, which is when I just capitalize the first letter of, in this case, the second word in the file. So that's what camel case looks like. This can become a whole bunch of words and you just capitalize the first letter of it. Just wanted to point that out. That's the only time I would encourage you to use capitals. Now you can come up with your own set of rules for how you like to write HTML, but I don't recommend you write it all in uppercase. Everyone will think you're an angry coder or something. But there we go. Here's our little summary right there. And let's move on to greater and more exciting things.
Okay, so at this point, we have taken a look at the basics of HTML. And what we've created is a page that's primarily functional. It's certainly not very attractive. We've managed to get it to contain our content. And what we haven't been able to do is style that content to make it look the way we want it to. In order to do that, we have to use another markup language. This one is called CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. We don't have to worry about that too much right now, though. What we'll do is use CSS in conjunction with HTML in order to style our content. And when I say style, I mean a few things. We can change the color, size, and layout primarily of any element on our page. So any website that you see that you like the style and appearance of, remember that trick that we talked about in our first video, you can always right-click or control-click on a blank part of a browser screen and take a look at the code. And some of the code you see might be CSS. What we're going to try to do in this portion of our class is create an external style sheet and link it to our HTML file. So things are going to get a little bit more complicated in terms of file management. We're going to be working from one folder, and in that folder will be our primary HTML file and also our new CSS file. So that's an area where people make a lot of mistakes, so we'll be sure to take a break at some point and look at the best practices for file management.